Come, come, whoever you are welcome here. No matter your age, your size, the color of your eyes, your hair, your skin, you are welcome here. No matter whom you love, how you speak, or whatever your abilities, you are welcome here. You're welcome here whether you come with laughter in your heart or tears. You are welcome here. If you come with an open mind, a loving heart, and willing hands, you are welcome here. Thank you.
Good morning. This morning it has been almost 50 years since the marches in Selma, Alabama. How many of you have seen that film? The rest of you need to. We went to it last night and I am all fired up. The name of the movie is Selma. And today, as we celebrate Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy, we begin with a love story and the beginnings of a journey that he and Coretta Scott took together. They were up in Boston studying when they met. They were up in Boston partly because they did not want to study in segregated schools. They went to a place where they could study freely with people of all races. Coretta Scott King was studying voice at New England Conservatory, and Martin Luther King Jr. was studying theology at Boston University. And we have someone from here going there just in a few months. And quite soon after they met each other, they fell in love. I wonder if they had any idea of where their life would take them. I wonder if they knew that they would be on the forefront of change. When we think about them at that time, we wonder if they had that kind of excitement, but they had left. They wanted to study in the North, away from the segregated South. But when they were called to ministry in Montgomery, Alabama, they were full of hope. I've been reading these amazing biographies this week. One about Coretta Scott King in particular. And I think of them riding in their car. It's 1954. And I wonder as they were driving south if they didn't open their windows and have their radio going up and singing. They knew that an adventure was waiting. They also knew that they were going to a state and a city that was segregated down to the buses that plied the streets. And that black residents of Montgomery were sitting in the back and the white ones were in the front. And morning and evening, all this time leading up to their visit, to their move to Montgomery, Rosa Parks rode in the back of a bus on her way to work. They were all on their way, and we are always on our way. When Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King, newly married, arrived in Montgomery at the Dexter Baptist Church, they had to drive into the segregated neighborhood where only blacks lived. Now, I wonder what image you have of Dexter Baptist Church. Just be thinking about it. Because perhaps what you're thinking is not the way it was. This was an affluent church. One biographer described it as an upper income church, a somewhat intellectual church. It sounds more like a Unitarian church than a Baptist, than our image of a Baptist church. It was a church that frowned on emotionalism and what they called amening, which is kind of what we think of in Baptist churches. And it's interesting to me that Dr. King, the work that he started to do there, that he saw that they needed to do, was very much the work of Unitarian Universalism. He wanted to make it a place for everyone, where everyone felt welcome and at home. He added initiatives around religious education, care for the sick, and scholarships for high school students. He used more arts in the worship service, and he had a committee that addressed social and political issues. Sounds a little Unitarian Universalist to me. He also wanted the whole congregation to live by principles of brotherly love and kindness that were integrated into every aspect of their church life: spiritual, physical, cultural, and political. In his words, he wanted to build beloved community. He wanted to integrate the life of that Dexter church into the whole world. And when he looked out at the injustices in Montgomery, he saw the injustices of the world. And there was such injustice: voting rights, in education, and in every aspect of life for the black people of Alabama. The injustice he saw around him, that his congregants experienced, he felt was a threat to the justice everywhere. What he saw is what we see: that the promised land is not in the future after we die, but it must be a possibility, and it must be our work to make it possible right here and right now. He dreamed of a network of mutuality that sounds very much like our interdependent web of life. On May 31st, 1955, the Supreme Court ordered school desegregation with all deliberate speed. On August 28th, 1955, Emmett Till. How many of you know Emmett Till? Emmett Till was a young African American who was visiting the South, was visiting Mississippi from Chicago. He was kidnapped and lynched. His open coffin during his funeral in Chicago drew the attention of the world, and it readied people for action. In Montgomery that same year, tensions were rising. We have felt these tensions during these past months in Ferguson, Alabama. Ferguson, yes. Missouri, sorry. Whew. Ferguson, Missouri. But we have felt them strongly under all that has happened in this nation this year. And in Montgomery, Alabama, the bus boycott had begun very famously with Rosa Parks, and it was continuing. Some people were walking up to 20 miles a day to avoid riding those buses. The white people of Montgomery were getting very nervous. phone calls to Coretta and Martin's home became more aggressive. The threats on their life increased. This is about one of those evenings.
On the evening of January 30th, 1956, Martin Luther King Jr. left home to attend a mass meeting. Coretta stayed behind with their baby Yolanda. Mary Lucy Williams stayed at the house with Coretta and the baby. After the men left, Coretta and Mary Lucy moved to the living room where they visited and watched television. Little Yolanda was down the hall in her room, fast asleep. Coretta began to feel something strange sitting in that front room. Then there was a noise from the outside, like the sound of a brick hitting the front steps. In an instant, Coretta sprang to her feet and darted down the hall. Startled, Mary Lucy hurried after her. As they moved past the guest room, an explosion rocked the house. Shards of glass and splinters of wood filled the air as the blast ripped through the front wall of the house, tearing off part of the porch and destroying the picture window in the living room. Thick black smoke filled the house. Cold, wintry air rushed through the gaping hole. Awakened by the blast, Yolanda cried out from her room. Coretta picked up her and held her close. With Mary Lucy beside her, they slowly crept down the hall to review the damage.
The sofa and chair where they had been sitting were across the room, ripped and ruined. As she stood there surveying the damage, her first thought was to call someone, but everyone she would call was at the mass meeting. She could call the police, but she was not sure how they would respond. Then a voice called out, "Is anyone hurt?" For an instant, Coretta felt a pang of fear strike her soul, but almost as quickly she recognized the voice of her neighbor. The two of them hugged each other and then turned again to view the damage. When Coretta mentioned her hesitation about calling the police, the neighbor told her that she had already notified them. Just then the phone rang. When Coretta answered, a female voice cried out, "Yes, I did it, and I'm just sorry I didn't kill all you bastards." Shaken by the anger in the voice, Coretta had little time to dwell on it. By the time she hung up the phone, people were arriving in every direction.
For a moment, I want you to be in Martin's shoes. He hears, you hear, that someone, an unknown person, a terrorist, these were terrorists, has bombed your home, your place of living, where the people closest to you in the world are enjoying an evening together. Martin rushed home as you would have rushed home. The place that was bombed was the parsonage of this Dexter Baptist church. He ran in. First, he made sure, as you would have, that Coretta and their child were safe. And then he moved out to the front porch. He had left a huge meeting, and those people had followed him there, neighbors. There was a crowd gathering in front of the porch and out onto the street. There were voices calling to respond in anger, to get guns out. Martin gestured to the crowd to be quiet. hush fell over them. All the people who were gathered on the lawn and farther out on the street. And first he told them, as you would have told them, Coretta and our baby are safe. They are not harmed. And then he said these words. Now, let's not become panicky. If you have weapons, take them home. If you do not have them, please do not seek to get them. We cannot solve this problem with retaliatory violence. We must meet violence with non-violence. Remember the words of Jesus, "He who lives by the sword will perish by the sword." We must love our white brothers, no matter what they do to us. And then, in parentheses, I want you to add what all of the people he spoke with knew in their bones, had experienced awful injustice, had been pushed to the back of the bus, this is something that often happened on those buses. When a black person got on and paid, the bus driver would make them go back to another entrance to get on. And then sometimes, as they were going back to that place, they would drive away. So I want you to somehow feel that anger that was just a huge well in the people who stood in front of Martin Luther King's house. And he said, we must love our white brothers, no matter what they do to us. We must make them know that we love them. Jesus cries out in words that echo across the centuries, love your enemies. Bless them that curse you, pray for them that despitefully use you. This is what we must live by. Wow, if only we heard those words of Jesus more often. And then he said, we must meet hate with love. Remember, if I am stopped, this movement will stop, because God is with this movement. Go home with this glowing faith and this radiant assurance. And that's what happened. People went home. And that moment was a chance when the hearts of those people who were waiting, who were on the verge of violence, they solidified among them their commitment to protest and to this notion of resisting evil in a spirit of love. Prior to that moment, that notion of love and forgiveness had only been an ideal, like it is for us. Don't you just love everyone until somebody does something crappy to you? I know that's my problem. I also think that this work that I spoke about in the first part of the sermon, this work that he did in Dexter Baptist Church, of building beloved community, of making sure that people were loving with each other, that created this base, this center from which people could courageously be non-violent. When terrorism rips through our peace, something is opened, and we see the foundation of what we were standing on. In my first year of seminary, just as I was beginning, I have told this story before, but a gunman went into a church in Knoxville, a Unitarian Universalist church in Knoxville, and killed 4 people. The minister was a graduate of the seminary where I was attending, and when he came to speak with us, he said, I had built up relationships all through Knoxville in my interfaith work. And so when this horrible thing happened, everyone came, and people who were Presbyterian, Muslim, and Jewish said to him, we are Unitarian Universalists. The work of building beloved community inside that church, and then the links with outside organizations, with other faith groups, provided that place where people could act not out of fear, but out of love. Now, I'm going to ask you a question, because this is a question that I have been asking myself all week. It's so interesting that with all the people who have lived on this earth, we still remember Martin Luther King Jr. He comes up for us. He somehow embodies, he exemplifies a life that was able to bring about change and then was remembered for it. His story, the story of his whole life, has become in this country and also in this world. We were in France a couple of years ago, and just not any town in particular, we stopped at a drugstore and we looked, and the name of the street was Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. He is remembered all over this earth. And I believe that his voice, that was the voice of this nation, it spoke to the whole world. And somehow he was the one who was able to show that racial injustice was a human problem. It wasn't just a problem with those people. He showed up in the life he was given, and he did what was necessary, and the world changed. I believe that this story is a hard story in other ways. I think it is hard, and I've heard civil rights activists say, Martin Luther King is dead. And I think they say that because they want us to value the leaders that have come up in his place. And I believe they want us to be leaders. But I still believe that there is something about his story that shows us something about how we want to be in this world. I think that if we listen, that we will hear these voices that run through that network of mutuality, and that these voices call us to do what we can do. We are the ones to stand up in the situations we have. Martin Luther King Jr. had Montgomery, Alabama. Completely unknown to him while he was choosing to go there. Rosa Parks was there. And he was able to support that one act and turn it into a movement that desegregated buses. He found his place in that network of mutuality, and I believe that each of us has a place in that interconnected web of life. What is your place in that network of mutuality? And what is the place of this community? We see that connection in Dr. King, and we know it when we feel it in ourselves. I believe that you knew it when you called a transgender minister to this pulpit. I believe that Jan Vanderhooft knew it when he told his high school chemistry class, and I hope I'm not embarrassing you, Jan. He told his class that he would not abide negative comments around sexual identity. I see this in Emily Smith when she wanted to hold a vigil for Layli Alcorn, a young transgender woman who took her life. And on that night, I saw that in the transgender members of our community who spoke their truth in this place. And I see it all the time in our youth. And I'm not going to embarrass you, but I'm telling you, I hear stories. I hear stories about the way that you stand up for children who are being bullied. I hear stories of how courageous you are. I also see it in Bill Dobbs, who's continued with his religious transition meetings. And if I were to tell all the stories that I see as I look out at you and all the ways that you have stood up for climate change, and I'm looking straight at Tucker and Ted, I would need a whole hour and you would be dying for your coffee. But I hope that remembering Dr. King and this embodiment of this call of how to be in the world affirms you and pushes you. I hope it affirms you and makes you think, I'm on the right track. It's worth the trouble to speak with our neighbors. It's worth the trouble to speak up in PTA meetings and in this sanctuary. And it is important to show up at rallies. And maybe this is tweaking you a little bit. How many of you want clean air?
Oh, yes.
We only had like 8 or 9 of us at the clean air rally, and they were counting. You see, that's something else about that I Have a Dream speech. There were millions of people gathered listening. That would not have had much oomph if Martin Luther King Jr. said, oh, I got this really great speech, and he'd gone to a studio and done it. No, it's because all those other people showed up. So I'm telling you, on that clean air rally day, if you want clean air, then change your schedule and get up to the Capitol and stand with all of us, because I'm afraid I won't be there this time. I'm far away, so here I am, hypocritical again. But I'm out of the city. If you're in the city or in the state and you're thinking, you know, oh gosh, I got to change this bit of my schedule, and I was really going to try to go shopping today, and we've got people coming over for dinner. Think of Martin Luther King and change your schedules and show up at the Capitol. And you youth, push your parents to do that.
Can do.
Because this is part of what we see with Martin Luther King Jr. that is amazing. We're all of the people who gathered around him. And when Lou and I heard that the Supreme Court is going to be talking about marriage equality probably in April, we're going to be on the lookout for that rally, because I want to be one of those million people who's standing out there, because I think I have experienced a little bit what some of those people in Montgomery experienced. I never thought marriage equality would be possible. And I think many of those people who got on those buses and endured the awful hardship, they didn't think it was possible. And then Martin Luther King says, well, first Rosa Parks won't won't do that. She won't go back to the back of the bus. And then Martin Luther King has a dream about how he can support a bigger movement. And all of you have been a part of that movement towards marriage equality in this place. And I am grateful to you. So I ask you, what is the dream for you on our road ahead? I have been out in this community. Part of what I do is building relationships. I have lots of friends now in interfaith. I have Muslim friends, Jewish friends, and I have a group of Christian colleagues I get together with. And when I go to the Capitol, I know those people, and we stand together. We stood together on Friday around religious freedom and understanding that we want religious freedom to mean what Thomas Jefferson intended. But what I need from you is, I need those Rosa Parks. I want you all to be thinking, there's still so much discrimination in our schools and in our workplaces. And I know that the ideas are out there that can go out into the world. And there is also the work that we are in the middle of, which is building relationships with one another, acting out of love rather than fear. And by doing that, we are creating a world from which we can make a difference. We will be resilient even if we continue this sea voyage thing when the seas are rocky. We can be safe as Martin Luther King and his family were safe. With our relationships strong with one another, we can embark on a journey that has meaning. I invite you to come and go with me to that land.